Horus had been the first for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to have a brother. For years, he alone had fought beside the Emperor. He alone had shared his victories, his confidence, and his vision for mankind. Then the Emperor found Leman Russ, and Horus discovered that even a Primarch could feel replaced. He watched the newcomers from a gallery high above the refectorum. They were warriors from Fenris, wrapped in dirty pelts and crude iron. They mocked the servants, broke priceless glassware, and treated the splendor of the Emperor's ship like a strange joke. At their center sat their king. Leman Russ was almost as large as Horus. His blonde hair was wild, his manners primitive, and two enormous wolves slept beside his feet. But there was no mistaking what he was. Horus could feel it before a single word was spoken. This savage was his brother. The Emperor looked upon Russ with pride. Horus looked upon him with dismay. He argued that the Fenrisians were too primitive for the Great Crusade. They barely understood the technology surrounding them. They carried swords of common steel. Civilizing them would take time, and giving them the power of a legion could prove disastrous. They should not be welcomed. They should be erased. But the Emperor saw through him. Horus was not afraid of Fenrisian ignorance. He was jealous. Until that moment, the Emperor's attention had belonged to him alone. Now, another sun stood beneath that golden gaze. Another Primarch would receive a legion. Another would share in the glory that Horus had begun to think of as his birthright. The Emperor understood his resentment, but he did not indulge it. Russ had conquered half of Fenris without advanced weapons, formal education, or knowledge of the wider galaxy. Left there, he might have conquered the entire world. He was not a mindless barbarian, and Horus was warned never to underestimate him. Then the master of the 6th Legion entered the chamber below. The laughter stopped instantly. Russ and his warriors changed in the space of a heartbeat. The drunken tribesmen vanished. In their place stood a pack of killers, every hand close to a weapon, every eye measuring distance and weakness. Horus leaned closer. For the first time, he saw what the Emperor had seen. These men were crude because they chose to appear crude. Beneath the pelts and laughter waited discipline, instinct, and violence held on a perfect leash. The Legion commander approached Russ. Gene-father and son studied one another. Then the warrior of the 6th knelt without hesitation. Horus had expected resistance. Instead, he saw recognition. The Legion had found its Primarch. Now Horus had to meet his brother. Russ was waiting for him in a private chamber. Without his warriors around him, something had changed. His posture was straighter, his eyes were sharper. Even the skins hanging from his shoulders looked less like the clothing of a savage and more like a costume deliberately worn. He greeted Horus in broken Gothic. Then he revealed that he had learned the language in only 5 days. Another warning. Russ understood far more than he allowed others to see. They spoke of the Great Crusade, of the Emperor's dream, of the imperial truth and its rejection of gods. Russ was unconvinced. A golden being had descended from the heavens, claimed him as a son, and carried him into the stars. Then that same being had declared that gods did not exist. To a son of Fenris, the contradiction was obvious. Russ did not openly defy the Emperor. He accepted his place in the crusade and the destiny that had brought him there. But he would not surrender the beliefs of his people simply because a greater power commanded it. Horus tried to correct him. Russ merely smiled. That smile troubled Horus more than open ignorance would have. The Wolf King knew he was being judged. He knew Horus considered him primitive, and he was enjoying it. When their meeting ended, Horus offered his hand. Russ took it, his grip carrying enough strength to surprise even a Primarch. They would be brothers. They would fight together. They would carry the Emperor's armies across the stars. But before Horus could leave, Russ asked one final question. On Fenris, brothers tested one another. If they ever fought in earnest, which of them would win? Horus answered without hesitation. He would. Russ considered the answer. Perhaps Horus was right. Perhaps one day they would discover the truth. Neither brother understood what that day would cost. By the time they finally fought, Horus would no longer be the son Russ had first met. The galaxy would be burning, and Leman Russ would carry a weapon made to reveal the truth buried inside a monster. Nearly 2 centuries passed. Russ and Horus fought together. They conquered worlds. They became brothers in more than blood. Then Horus betrayed the Emperor. By the time Russ returned to Terra, the brother he had once challenged was gone. The Warmaster now commanded demons. He survived wounds that should have killed him, and his flagship had become a living monument to corruption. Garviel Loken had seen that corruption from inside the vengeful spirit. He had faced his former father and returned alive. So Russ asked him one question. Could Horus still be killed? Loken gave him the truth. Not by Russ, perhaps not by anyone except the Emperor. Russ laughed. It was the response everyone expected from the Wolf King. But when the laughter ended, he did not reject the warning. He gathered his surviving Jarls aboard the Hrafnkel. The Space Wolves had suffered greatly since Prospero. Wolf Lords were dead. Great companies stood without masters. The legion that had once descended upon Magnus in overwhelming strength had been wounded at every step of its journey back to Terra. Now Russ intended to risk what remained. He admitted that Horus was beyond him. For the first time, the Wolf King told his sons that he could not win. Not yet. That final word changed everything. Russ believed every monster had a weakness. If ordinary steel could not find it, something older might. Something carried in blood, fate, and the spirit of Fenris. His chief rune priest was Kava. Disease had twisted Kava's body since birth. Even his power armor could not hide the damage. But in the realm beyond flesh, he possessed a strength that few could rival. And he could feel Horus. The Warmaster's altered soul trembled through the warp. The stench of his corruption had spread across the galaxy. Horus was a monster now. But the people of Fenris had hunted monsters since before they could write their own names. Kava believed their homeworld could reveal how to kill this one. The answer was not on Terra. It waited on Fenris. That decision brought Russ before his brothers. Rogel Dorn was preparing the defense of the Sol system. Sanguinius and Jagatai Khan had reached Terra, but Horus was still coming. Every ship mattered. Every warrior mattered. Every day mattered. Dorn planned to meet the traitor advance at Beta Garmon. The battle would cost countless lives. That was the purpose. Every day purchased there would give Dorn more time to strengthen the Imperial Palace. Russ saw only a slower death. He believed the Loyalists would come close to victory and fail at the final moment. Dorn demanded an alternative. Russ gave him one. He would leave Terra. He would take the Space Wolves back to Fenris, uncover Horus's weakness, and strike before the Warmaster reached the throne world. Dorn was furious. Russ was gambling an entire legion on knowledge he did not yet possess. Terra needed the Space Wolves. The Emperor needed them. But Russ had not been created to defend walls. He had been created to bring judgment. He was the Emperor's executioner. Now he intended to prove it. The argument turned toward the rune priests. Russ had supported the judgment at Nicaea. He had helped condemn the Librarius and punished Magnus for refusing to abandon sorcery. Yet his own legion still followed psychers wrapped in bones, runes, and the traditions of Fenris. Dorn called him a hypocrite. Russ did not deny the contradiction. He only insisted there was a difference. Magnus had believed knowledge justified every risk. The rune priests believed survival depended upon knowing when to stop. Jagatai supported him. The storm seers of the White Scars followed the same principle. They touched the warp through discipline, tradition, and restraint. Dorn remained unconvinced. Power always demanded more power. No ritual could make the warp safe. No wisdom could guarantee control. But Russ was no longer asking for permission. Only one voice could have stopped him. The Emperor's. Russ called out to his father. He asked for guidance. He waited. Nothing answered. The Emperor remained hidden beneath the palace, fighting a war his sons could not see. Russ accepted the silence. He left the council while Dorn called after him. Malthador warned him. Constantine Valdor questioned him. Russ listened to both. Then he continued toward his ships. He knew Horus might kill him. He knew the Space Wolves could be destroyed far from Terra. He knew their absence might weaken the palace when the final assault began. But knowing the danger did not change his path. The Hrafunkel turned away from Terra.
Behind it followed the battered fleet of the 6th Legion. Ahead waited Fenris, and beneath its ice and fire stood a door that opened into the land of the dead.
Fenris did not welcome its sons home gently. The space wolves emerged from the warp in chaos. Geller fields burned with unnatural light. Smaller ships tumbled through the void. Then the engines returned. The fleet gathered, and the 6th Legion descended toward the world that had made it. Fenris was approaching the end of its summer. That did not make it peaceful. The wolf's eye hung enormous in the sky. Its heat melted glaciers and turned frozen rivers into floods. Volcanoes opened across the crust. Ash clouds rolled over the mountains while lightning burned through them. Winter froze Fenris. Summer tried to tear it apart. Russ looked upon the destruction with pride. This was a hard world, his world. And if any place could teach him how to kill Horus, it was here. The space wolves returned to the Fang, but there was little time for celebration. The next day was the solstice. Fenris would reach its closest point to the wolf's eye. For a few hours, according to Kava, the boundary between the living world and the Underverse would weaken. Russ had brought one weapon from Terra, the Spear of the Emperor. It had been forged by his father and given to him long before the Heresy. Russ had never liked it. Every weapon of Fenris had a true name, a name that declared what the weapon was and hinted at the fate waiting inside its metal. Russ had never named the spear. He called it only his father's gift. That refusal concealed fear. Russ believed the weapon knew something about him, something he was not ready to face. Now it had followed him home. At dawn, Russ left the Fang. With him went Kava, 7 other rune priests, 10 Wolfguard, and Bjorn the One-Handed. Their destination was Krakgard, the funeral mountain of the space wolves. But Russ had not come to honor the dead. He had come to ask them how to kill his brother. The group crossed bridges above violent rivers and climbed through valleys where the last winter ice died beneath the summer heat. Then they reached the ritual ground. A glacier pressed down from the heights. Black stone surrounded a lake filled with blue ice. Wooden poles stood beside the water, hung with the skulls of dead space marines. At the center of the site, a volcanic opening breathed poison into the air. This was Siege door. To an imperial scholar, it was only a vent reaching toward the molten heart of Fenris. To the rune priests, it was an entrance to the kingdom of the dead. Russ understood both explanations. Only one could help him now. The Wolfguard were ordered back. They protested. Their duty was to protect their Primarch. Kava told them there was nothing here they could protect him from. Only Bjorn was allowed to remain, not as a guardian, as a witness. Kava placed him upon a stone overlooking the path and ordered him to face the Fang. Bjorn was not to turn around, not for screams, not for battle. Not even if he heard Russ calling his name. If the Primarch failed to return before sunset, Bjorn would carry news of his death back to the Legion. That was his only purpose, to survive where greater men might not. Russ and the rune priests continued without him. At Sirtir's door, the 8 Gothi formed a circle. They wore no power armor, only leather, masks, bones, and carved wards. Kava struck his staff against the stone. The others joined him.
Their voices rose as Fenris shook beneath their feet. Kava warned Russ about the beings waiting beyond the door. He could drink what they offered. He could not eat their meat. He must answer no question that might bind him. And above all, he must remember who he was. Then Kava drew Russ close. He whispered a name into his ear. Not Leman Russ, not the Wolf King. It was the name the Emperor had given him before the Primarchs were stolen from Terra. A name Russ had never heard. For the first time that day, he was afraid. Kava ordered him to breathe. Russ leaned over the volcanic opening and filled his lungs with the poisonous breath of Fenris. His mouth burned. His throat closed. The chanting became louder than artillery. The mountain vanished beneath him. And Leman Russ fell through Sirtir's door. He landed alone in an endless field of snow. The summer was gone. The rune priests were gone. Ahead, a black wolf moved across the white horizon. Russ followed, and the dead began to watch him.
The black wolf led Russ across the frozen plain. At the horizon stood a longhouse filled with firelight. Inside, creatures shaped like men and wolves tore human flesh from the bone. Their king sat upon a throne, a vast black wolf. Behind him hung the spear of the Emperor. Russ had entered the court of the Earl King. He demanded the hospitality owed to a traveling king. The Earl King wanted him cast into the cold, but even the dead were bound by ancient law. A shadow wolf named Amarok offered him human meat. Russ refused without giving insult. Then Amarok offered him drink. The Mjod was frozen inside a lead bowl. Amarok melted it and heated the drink until it boiled. Russ drank, but the level barely moved. The bowl contained the savage sea of Fenris. No man could drink an ocean dry. Russ had failed his first challenge. A claw wound opened across his chest. For the second trial, an old woman stepped from the shadows. She looked weak. Then she seized Russ. Strength vanished from his body. His joints stiffened. His vision dimmed. The woman forced him to the ground with ease. Russ tried again. The result was the same. She was not simply old. She was age itself. The fate waiting for every warrior who survived long enough. Russ could not defeat her. A second wound opened across his chest. The third challenge appeared easier. A sleeping wolf lay before the throne. Russ had only to move it. He pulled with all the strength of a Primarch. The creature barely noticed. Then it hurled him across the hall. Only then did Russ see its second head. The beast was Morkai, the guardian of death. No mortal strength could move death from its appointed place. A third wound tore across Russ's chest. The shadow wolves rose to devour him. Everything inside Russ demanded that he fight, but Kava's warning returned. He was more than a wolf. Russ demanded the final challenge. The Earl King ordered him to name what he had faced.
Russ understood. The bowl had been the savage sea. The old woman had been age. The sleeping beast had been Morkai. The challenges were impossible because they were never tests of strength. They were tests of wisdom. Only one answer remained. Russ had to name the Earl King. He looked at the spear hanging behind the throne. Then he spoke the secret name Kava had given him. The Earl King was Russ, the savage, the executioner, the wolf the Emperor had created and Fenris had shaped. The hall began to collapse. The shadow wolves vanished into smoke. The Earl King's skin split apart, and from inside the beast stepped another Leman Russ. This one had never landed on Fenris. His hair was short, his uniform was gray and ordered. No pelts, no runes, no fangs. He was the son the Emperor might have raised on Terra, a soldier without the mask of a barbarian. Russ wondered if this was what he should have been. The other Russ rejected the idea. Neither version was more real. One had been shaped by Terra, the other by Fenris. Both were weapons created for a purpose neither fully understood. Russ had earned one answer. He did not ask how to kill Horus. He already knew victory might be impossible. Instead, he asked how the spear could help him. The Terran Russ called the weapon into his hand. Its true name was Gungnir, Wolfsbane. A fragment of the Emperor's power had been forged into its blade, but its greatest gift was not strength. It was sight. The spear revealed truth, not gently, not selectively. It showed its victim what they were, no matter how painful that knowledge might be. That was why Russ feared it. Then the Terran Russ drove the spear through Russ's heart. The blade shattered bone and erupted from his back. Russ fell to his knees, and he saw the truth. He understood something of how the Primarchs had been created, something hidden behind the Emperor's science, something that would haunt him long after the Heresy. But he also understood the weapon's purpose. He did not need to kill Horus. He only needed to wound him. If Wolfsbane pierced the Warmaster, it could tear through the corruption surrounding his soul. For one moment, Horus would remember his true name. Horus Lupercal, son of the Emperor. The rest would be his choice. Russ collapsed into the snow. In the living world, Bjorn heard the rune priests screaming behind him. He had been ordered not to turn around. Then the screaming stopped.
Bjorn remained on the stone. He had obeyed Kava through every sound behind him. The chanting, the growls of things that did not belong in the living world, the deaths of the rune priests. Only when silence became unbearable did he turn. The ritual ground had become a battlefield. The Gothi lay dead across the red snow. Kava was among them. All 8 rune priests had given their lives to hold open the path through Sirtir's door. At the center of the circle lay Leman Russ. Smoke rose from the hole burned through his chest. For one terrible moment, Bjorn believed his Primarch was dead. Then Russ breathed. He had returned with a destination. The spear had shown him where Horus would be. Trisolian, a remote mechanicum system on the route to Beta Garmon. The Warmaster would pass through it on his road to Terra. Russ would be waiting. The Space Wolves left Fenris almost as soon as they had arrived. They carried the dead rune priests with them. They also carried a weapon that finally had a name: Wolfsbane. But Russ was not the only man whose fate was moving toward Trisolian. On the Heptalagon, a young Mechanicum adept was committing heresy. His name was Belisarius Call. He was not yet the ancient Archmagos who would reshape the Imperium 10,000 years later. He was young, ambitious, and dangerous in a way the Mechanicum did not understand. Call believed knowledge should be discovered, not merely preserved. That idea alone made him a threat. The Mechanicum taught that ancient technology was sacred. Innovation invited disaster. Questioning doctrine could end with execution, servitude, or the removal of everything that made a person human. Call questioned everything. He modified his own intelligence core in secret. One mistake could have erased his memories or cooked his brain. He accepted the risk. The improvement was small, but it made him faster than the adepts around him. His closest companion was Friedish. Friedish understood the danger of Call's curiosity. He warned him to obey. Call rarely listened. Both served Domina Hester Aspertia Sigma Sigma. She had replaced almost her entire body with machinery. Copies of her brain grew inside canisters attached to her form, constantly receiving her memories. If Aspertia died, one could be placed inside a new body. 3 centuries of knowledge would survive. Call found the idea horrifying. He also found it irresistible. Aspertia commanded the military forces of the Heptalagon. She recognized Call's talent and promoted him rather than destroying him for his illegal work. She valued genius, but she valued survival more. Loyalists and traitors both needed Trisolian because it controlled a vital route toward Beta Garmon. Aspertia studied the balance of power. Then she made her choice. When the Warmaster arrived, she would submit, not because she worshipped chaos, because she believed he would win. Viceroy Mendoza refused to betray the Imperium. Aspertia removed him and delivered the system to Horus. Across the Heptalagon, thousands of adepts gathered to receive the Warmaster. Then the vengeful spirit arrived. Fear reached the station before Horus did. It moved through the crowds without sound. When Horus stepped onto the platform, the assembled priests knelt. His presence was too powerful to resist. Call nearly knelt with them. Then he closed his mind to the data and sensation pouring through the station. For one instant, he saw beyond the Warmaster's charisma. There was something behind Horus's eyes, something bottomless,
hungry, and no longer human. Call made his decision. He would not serve it. He lowered his head with everyone else and began looking for a way to escape. Far beyond the station's sensors, another fleet entered the system. The space wolves had found their prey. But Russ could not attack openly. Horus possessed the larger fleet, the stronger position, and the power of the warp. So the Wolf King chose a path no sane commander would follow. Trisolion's 2 red stars orbited dangerously close together. Between them raged a sea of plasma, radiation, and violent gravity. Russ ordered his fleet directly through it. If the storm could blind the wolves, it could also blind Horus. The Hrafunkel entered the fire, and the hunt began.
The Hrafunkel entered the fire. Radiation hammered its shields. Gravity pulled from 2 directions. Burning plasma reached between the red stars like the arms of giants. No fleet was meant to cross that space. That was why Horus was not watching it. The storms blinded the traitor sensors. They also concealed the space wolves. Ships lost shields, hull plates melted, systems failed. The wolves continued. Then they emerged inside Horus's defenses. The attack began without warning. Space erupted. The Hrafunkel drove toward the vengeful spirit while the 6th Legion struck the surrounding fleet. Horus possessed more ships. Russ had surprise. For a few minutes, that was enough. The 2 Gloriana-class flagships opened fire at close range. Weapons built to destroy cities tore into void shields. Smaller vessels died between them. Russ had never expected to win in space. The fleet had one purpose: bring him close enough to board. The first space wolves crossed through gunfire and broken atmosphere. Many never reached the vengeful spirit. Others cut their way inside a ship that no longer obeyed nature. The corridors were warm. The walls appeared to breathe. Metal had begun to merge with flesh. Voices whispered from sealed chambers. Russ led from the front. Wolfsbane burned in his hand. He had brought 3 great companies, enough warriors to carve a path. Not enough to survive a prolonged battle aboard the Warmaster's flagship. The sons of Horus came at them in black and sea-green armor. Behind them came possessed warriors and creatures that had never been human. The space wolves answered with bolter fire, axes, and the fury of Fenris. Deck after deck became a slaughterhouse. Russ did not stop. He could feel the spear pulling him forward. It had found Horus once. Now it guided him through the ship. His fleet was being destroyed outside. His sons were dying around him. If he failed, all of it would mean nothing. On the Heptalagon, Call saw the battle begin. The station shook. Power failed across entire sections. Aspertia ordered her forces to defend the Warmaster. Call found Friedish and told him they were leaving. Aspertia possessed a private vessel named the Silencia. It was small, fast, and capable of warp travel. If they reached it, they might escape before either fleet destroyed the station. But first, Call had to break Aspertia's control.
She was connected directly to the soldiers defending the heptagon. Every Skitarii warrior under her command moved according to her will. Call carried a device she did not know existed, a code patterner of his own design. It could attack the command architecture of the Mechanicum from within. Creating it was Heresy. Call activated it. The code spread through the network. Asperge's command systems burned out. The neural control binding her Skitarii collapsed. For the first time, her warriors could choose whom they served. Call showed them proof of her betrayal. Their weapons turned against their former mistress. As the chamber descended into violence, Call took one of the canisters attached to Asperge's body. Inside was a living copy of her brain. 300 years of knowledge, war, science, exploration. Friedrich understood. Call was not only escaping, he was stealing a human mind. Call did not deny it. Knowledge could not be allowed to die because its owner had chosen the wrong side. They ran for the Silencia. Above them, Russ reached the heart of the vengeful spirit. The last doors opened. Beyond them waited Horus. The Warmaster wore the power of chaos like a second suit of armor. Russ saw the brother he remembered buried somewhere inside. Horus saw only another loyal son who had come to die. For nearly 2 centuries, one question had waited between them. If they fought, which brother would win? Now the galaxy would receive its answer.
Horus moved first. Worldbreaker struck with enough force to kill a lesser being instantly. Russ avoided the blow. The deck shattered beneath him. Then the brothers collided. They had fought beside each other for almost 2 centuries. Each understood the strength hidden behind the other's armor. But Horus was no longer fighting with his own strength alone. Chaos moved through him. Every strike carried the power of the gods that had claimed him. Russ was faster. Horus was stronger. The Wolf King attacked with controlled precision, searching for the single opening the spear required. Horus fought like an avalanche. Worldbreaker destroyed armor and stone with every missed blow. The talon of Horus cut through Russ's defenses. Blood covered the floor. Russ had entered knowing he could not win by skill alone. He did not need to. He needed one wound. Around them, space wolves and sons of Horus killed each other beneath the gaze of their fathers. No one could interfere. This battle belonged to the brothers. Horus drove Russ down. He mocked the Emperor. He mocked the loyalty that had brought Russ there. He offered him a place beside the Warmaster in the empire that would rise from Terra's ashes. Russ refused. He had questioned the Emperor. He had regretted Prospero. He had grown tired of being used as a weapon. But Horus had not found freedom. He had only exchanged one master for 4. Russ attacked again. Horus broke his guard. Worldbreaker came down. Russ allowed the blow to land. The impact crushed armor and drove pain through his body, but it brought Horus close.
close enough. Russ drove Wolfsbane into his brother. The golden blade entered Horus's side. The spear did not miss. It found the wound left by the blade on Davin, the place where the fall had begun. Light exploded through the chamber. The power surrounding Horus vanished. For one moment, the gods lost their hold. The Warmaster fell to his knees. His face changed. The monster disappeared. Horus Lupercal looked up at his brother. He remembered. Davin, Istvan, the shattered legions. The worlds burned in his name. He saw what he had become. Russ stood over him. Wolfsbane remained buried in Horus's body. One final thrust could end the war. Terra would be saved. Countless lives would survive. Russ had come to execute a monster, but the eyes looking back at him belonged to his brother. The same brother who had once watched him enter the Emperor's ship wearing skins and iron. The same brother who had promised to fight beside him across the stars. Russ hesitated. He believed Horus might still choose to return. He believed the truth revealed by the spear might be enough. It was not. The Chaos Gods closed around Horus again. The regret vanished from his face. Darkness returned to his eyes. The talon of Horus tore into Russ. Claws punched through armor, flesh, and organs. The Wolf King was thrown across the chamber. He struck the deck and did not rise. The opening was gone. Bjorn and the surviving Wolf Guard charged. They knew they could not defeat Horus. They only needed to reach their Primarch. Space wolves threw themselves between Russ and death. Some bought a second. Others bought less. It was enough. They dragged Russ from the chamber while their brothers died behind them. The retreat became a running battle through the vengeful spirit. Outside, their fleet was collapsing. The surviving wolves escaped Trisolian under constant fire. Their legion had been devastated. Their Primarch hovered between life and death. The Emperor's executioner had found his target and lowered the blade. But the mission was not meaningless. Wolfsbane had done more than cut Horus's flesh. It had opened a wound inside his soul. A wound chaos could not easily close. Horus survived, but something within him had been divided. One part remained the Warmaster, the chosen vessel of the dark gods. The other remembered the man he had been. That fragment resisted. And while the space wolves fled toward Yarant, Horus Lupercal collapsed upon the vengeful spirit. The road to Terra remained open. But the master of the traitor host could no longer walk it.
While Horus collapsed, the Heptalagon died around Call. The station was breaking apart. Sections of its structure fell toward the moon below. Fire spread through corridors that had once seemed indestructible. Call, Friedish, and their servant Teslar reached Aspertia's hidden hangar. The Silencia was still there. They boarded under falling debris and released the docking clamps. The ship escaped through a collapsing aperture as the battle filled the void around them. Call carried Aspertia's cloned mind aboard. He had survived Horus. He had preserved knowledge that should have died with its owner. And he had crossed another line the Mechanicum considered sacred. It would not be the last. Behind the Silencia, the Heptalagon broke apart. The space wolves fled. The sons of Horus held the system. By every conventional measure, Horus had won. But the victory had poisoned him. The wound in his side refused to close. Blood fell from it and burned into ash before reaching the floor. The Warmaster could no longer stand. Then he stopped speaking. His sons carried him to the throne aboard the vengeful spirit. There he remained, alive, unmoving, his eyes open but seeing nothing. The body of Horus had survived Wolfsbane. His soul had not escaped unharmed. The spear had divided what chaos had tried to make whole. One part of Horus remained committed to the rebellion. The other had remembered what the rebellion had cost. That fragment withdrew deep into his mind and resisted the gods. The result was silence. The traitor host had lost its master at the moment it needed him most. Terra was close. Guilliman and the lion were approaching from behind. Every delay threatened the entire war. But Horus could not lead. He could not give orders. He could not even rise from his throne. The sons of Horus began to fracture. Horus Eximinand and Falcus Kibre guarded their father and rejected anyone who offered sorcery as a cure. Others looked toward Ezekiel Abaddon, but the first captain was absent. Command fell to Malaghurst the Twisted. He had served Horus since before the rebellion. His body had been broken long ago. His loyalty had not. Malaghurst understood the danger. The sons of Horus were not held together by doctrine. They were held together by devotion to their father. If Horus died, the Legion would tear itself apart. And the other traitor primarchs would follow their own wars. Angron had become a creature of endless rage. Fulgrim had abandoned the campaign for the pleasures of the warp. Magnus followed purposes known only to himself. Mortarion had been sent ahead. Alfarius could not be trusted. Kurz was gone. Perturabo remained useful, but obedience was not loyalty. The rebellion needed Horus. Without him, there would be no united march on Terra. Then Lorgar arrived. The Primarch of the Word-Bearers had been the first son to embrace chaos fully. He understood the gods better than any of his brothers, and when he looked upon Horus, he did not see a wounded king. He saw an opportunity. Lorgar had once believed Horus was the chosen instrument of the gods. Now that instrument appeared broken. The Warmaster had allowed Russ to reach him. He had been wounded by a weapon carrying the Emperor's power. And while Horus remained trapped inside his own mind, the war stood still. Lorgar began to believe the gods required another champion, someone who understood their will.
someone who had prepared the galaxy for their coming. Someone like him. But he could not simply claim the title of Warmaster. The traitor legions were scattered. Their primarchs had become monsters, slaves to their own obsessions. Before Lorgar could replace Horus, he needed to gather them. Perturabo would bring Angron. Lorgar would retrieve Fulgrim. Both demon primarchs would be taken to Ulanor, where the traitor host was assembling for the final march. There, before their brothers and their armies, Lorgar would prove that Horus was no longer fit to lead. The plan was ambitious. It was also built upon one fatal assumption. Lorgar believed Horus was helpless. On the throne of the vengeful spirit, the Warmaster did not move. But somewhere inside the darkness, Horus was still fighting. And Malighurst was preparing to follow him in.
The traitor armada could not reach Terra without its primarchs. But two of them no longer cared about the war. Angron wanted only slaughter. Fulgrim wanted sensation without end. Both had become demon princes. Neither answered ordinary commands. Perturabo went after Angron. The Lord of Iron hated what the rebellion was becoming. He had joined Horus to overthrow a false empire. Now sorcerers spoke in riddles, demons walked through warships, and strategy was being replaced by prophecy. Perturabo trusted weapons, numbers, logistics, things that obeyed rules. Angron no longer obeyed anything. The search led Perturabo first to Sarum, a forge world where machines and demons had been bound together since the beginning of the Heresy. Deep below its surface waited Saram, the demon that had helped create the first weapons of the World Eaters. It possessed Vok, one of Perturabo's own warriors, twisting flesh and armor into a living gun platform. The creature gave Perturabo the location he needed. Angron was on Deluge. The warning came with it. The Red Angel was no longer Perturabo's brother. He was a storm of rage wearing a Primarch's shape. Perturabo went anyway. Deluge had become a world of corpses. Angron's followers had turned the planet into an offering to Khorne. When Perturabo landed, the demon Primarch came for him immediately. Angron expected another duel, a contest of strength, a river of blood. Perturabo refused to give him what he wanted. The Iron Warriors opened fire from a distance, artillery, massed bolters, weapons positioned according to a design Angron was too enraged to see. Every charge led into another firing line. Every attempt to reach Perturabo cost Angron more strength. The demon fed upon violence. Perturabo denied him worthy slaughter. Only when Angron had been weakened did the Lord of Iron face him. Forgebreaker met the axes of the Red Angel. Perturabo endured the fury. Then he broke it. Angron fell. Perturabo reminded him of the truth. The power inside him was not freedom. It belonged to Khorne. Angron had spent his mortal life fighting against slavery. Now he wore a chain no weapon could cut. The words reached something beneath the rage. Angron agreed to follow him to Ulanor.
Not because he had been convinced, because Perturabo had proved strong enough to command his attention. While the Iron Warriors hunted Angron, Lorgar entered the warp in search of Fulgrim. With him went Zardu Layak. The Crimson Apostle had already paid dearly for Lorgar's ambition. A secret had been carved into his mind: Fulgrim's true name. The name was more than a word. It was the shape of the demon's soul. To speak it was to seize control of him. It was also destroying Layak from within. Fulgrim had withdrawn into a palace beyond reality, a city built from desire, pain, and living flesh. He sat at its center in the form of a great serpent surrounded by the servants of Slaanesh. The war no longer interested him. Terra was only another mortal world. Horus was only another slave pretending to be a king. Lorgar asked Fulgrim to return. Fulgrim laughed at him. Then Lorgar used the weapon hidden inside Layak. The true name came from the Apostle's mouth. Every syllable tore through him. Blood filled his throat. Part of his soul was hollowed out to give the sound power. Fulgrim stopped laughing. The demon prince was dragged down by his own name. His strength vanished. His freedom vanished with it. Lorgar took command of the chain. Fulgrim would go to Ulanor. He would stand before Horus. And when Lorgar made his move, the Phoenician would become the weapon that struck the first blow. But Layak had learned something during the journey. Lorgar spoke constantly of serving the gods, yet every sacrifice was made by someone else. Layak carried the pain. Layak surrendered his soul. Layak spoke the name that could destroy him. Lorgar carried only the ambition. The Crimson Apostle remained obedient. For now. The two hunting parties turned toward Ulanor. Perturabo brought Angron in chains of discipline. Lorgar brought Fulgrim in chains of sorcery. Neither demon Primarch had come willingly. Both would soon kneel before a Warmaster Lorgar believed was dying. And aboard the vengeful spirit, Malaghurst prepared to decide which part of Horus would survive.
Malaghurst knew why Horus had vanished. Wolfsbane had forced the Warmaster to remember himself. That memory had become a refuge. Deep inside his own soul, Horus had withdrawn from the gods. As long as he remained there, his body would continue to die. Malaghurst faced an impossible choice. Allow the last human part of Horus to survive and lose the war, or destroy it and return a monster to the galaxy. For Malaghurst, there was no choice. His loyalty had never belonged to humanity. It belonged to Horus. He prepared a ritual aboard the vengeful spirit. A silver coin bearing the Warmaster's image, an athame, blood, and knowledge taken from Zardu Layak. The sons of Horus were already fighting among themselves. Some tried to stop the ritual, others defended it. While legionaries killed each other around the throne, Malaghurst opened a path into his father's mind. The guide waiting for him wore the face of Yaktan Cruz,
a Luna wolf who had remained loyal to the Emperor and died by Horus's hand. But this was a demon named Amarok. It knew the road. Malaghurst followed. He passed through memories, lies, and fragments of the war. Then he reached Ulanor. Not the corrupted world where the traitor host now gathered, the Ulanor of the past, the greatest victory of the Great Crusade. On a white terrace beneath a clean sky stood Horus Lupercal. He wore the white armor of the Luna wolves, no eye of Horus, no symbols of chaos, no wound in his side. This was Horus before Davin, the favored son, the brother, the Warmaster who still believed the future belonged to mankind. Russ's spear had awakened him. Now he was holding the dark gods outside. Malaghurst begged him to return. The Legion was breaking. The Primarchs were scattering. The road to Terra would close. Horus refused. He understood what waited beyond the refuge. If he returned to his body, the gods would take him again. They would use his anger, ambition, and need to defeat the Emperor. He would become their slave. Malaghurst told him the rebellion needed its Warmaster. Horus answered that a Warmaster who belonged to the gods was not a master at all. For one moment, Malaghurst saw the truth. Russ had succeeded. The brother he had wounded was still alive inside the monster. Horus could still resist. Perhaps he could even return. But the chance had come too late. The traitor legions had burned too much of the galaxy. Loyalist armies were approaching. Terra stood ahead. There was no road back to the Emperor, and Malaghurst could not imagine a future in which Horus surrendered. So he chose the only victory he understood. He attacked his father. The faithful Horus did not expect it. Malaghurst drove the ritual blade into the wound Wolfsbane had opened. The terrace fractured. The clean sky turned black. Horus looked at the servant who had followed him through every triumph and every crime. Malaghurst did not turn away. He had promised to protect the Warmaster. Now he protected the rebellion from the man Horus had once been. The last loyal fragment of Horus Lupercal began to die. The memory of the Luna wolves turned to ash. The gods rushed into the space it left behind. And Malaghurst paid the price. His soul had been the bridge into Horus's mind. When the refuge collapsed, the bridge collapsed with it. On the vengeful spirit, Horus moved, his eyes focused. The Warmaster rose from the throne. At his feet lay Malaghurst, dead. The twisted equerry had sacrificed more than his life. He had destroyed the last part of his father that might have sought redemption. The being that awakened still carried Horus's memories. It carried his face, his voice, his hatred of the Emperor. But Horus Lupercal, the son who had once stood beside his father at Ulanor, was gone. What remained was the Warmaster of Chaos. He looked upon the Legion tearing itself apart around him. One command ended the fighting. One presence restored obedience. The sons of Horus knelt. Their father had returned, and he was more powerful than before. Lorgar had gathered his allies, believing he would confront a dying rival. Instead, something was coming to Ulanor that could see through every layer of his betrayal. Malaghurst had saved the Warmaster. Now Lorgar would learn what he had saved.
Ulanor had once celebrated the Emperor's greatest triumph. Now it welcomed the armies coming to kill him. Warships crowded the sky. Titans marched beneath the symbols of chaos. Millions waited for the command that would send them toward Terra. The traitor Primarchs stood upon the same ground where they had once honored their father. Perturabo had brought Angron. Lorgar had brought Fulgrim. Magnus had answered the call. The rebellion was becoming an army again. Lorgar believed it would soon become his army. His plan depended upon Zardu Lyak. The Crimson Apostle held Fulgrim's true name inside his ruined soul. When the moment came, Lyak would release the demon Primarch. Fulgrim would attack Horus. Rituals hidden beneath the ground would overwhelm the wounded Warmaster. Then Lorgar would strike. The others would see Horus fall, and Lorgar would rise as the true champion of the gods. The vengeful spirit arrived. Horus descended to the surface. Lorgar understood his mistake immediately. The being approaching him was not weak. The power surrounding Horus crushed thought and movement. Warriors lowered their heads without being ordered. Even the demon Primarchs watched in silence. Horus knew. He knew about the rituals. He knew about Fulgrim. But he allowed the plan to continue. He wanted to see who would make the final choice. Lorgar gave the signal. Lyak felt the command enter his mind. He could speak Fulgrim's name. He could release the Phoenician. And the coup would begin. Instead, Lyak remained silent. For years, Lorgar had used him as a vessel. His suffering had never mattered. His soul had been hollowed out to carry another man's weapon. Actea had reminded him that one freedom remained. He could choose. Lyak chose Horus. The true name remained unspoken. Fulgrim did not attack. Lorgar reached for the powers beneath Ulanor. Horus stripped them away. The Warmaster struck him down. Worldbreaker shattered Lorgar's armor and drove him into the ground. Lorgar tried to rise. Horus forced him to his knees. The sun who had taught the galaxy to worship chaos now knelt before its chosen vessel. Horus could have killed him. He did not. Death would have made Lorgar a martyr. Exile would make him irrelevant. Horus banished his brother from the war. Lorgar would not march upon Terra. He would leave Ulanor knowing the gods he served had chosen another son.
Then Horus turned to the word-bearers below. Behind Lyac waited 5,000 warriors known as the Unspeaking. They had followed Lorgar to Ulanor. Now they remained with Horus. Lyac knelt. The Unspeaking followed. Lorgar left without them. His coup had given Horus another army. The other Primarchs understood. Angron's rage could not hide the chain around his soul. Fulgrim's laughter could not hide his obedience. Magnus possessed knowledge beyond mortal understanding, yet even he had answered the summons. Perturabo despised what they had become, but he remained. None of them loved Horus. Love was no longer required, only submission. The Warmaster raised Worldbreaker. The armies answered. The final road opened before them. Terra. But someone had to go ahead. Someone had to secure the route and become the blade aimed at the Sol system. That task fell to Mortarion. The Primarch of the Death Guard despised weakness. He had been raised beneath the poisonous skies of Barbarous. His legion was built around endurance. Mortarion also hated sorcery. He hated the warp. He hated the creatures inside it. Yet he had joined a rebellion ruled by all three. Caelus Typhon had been Mortarion's oldest companion, his first captain, and the hidden servant of another god. He returned before the march on Terra with a plan already moving. Navigators disappeared. Routes were changed. Warnings were ignored. Then the Death Guard fleet entered the warp. The Geller fields remained active. The ships were sealed. No enemy boarded them. No weapon struck their hulls. But something entered with them. A disease. And for the most resilient legion in the galaxy, death would soon become the one mercy they could not reach.
The disease began quietly. A legionary felt tired. Then another began to cough. Within hours, the Death Guard fleet had become a prison. The destroyer plague spread from ship to ship without physical contact. Sealed doors did nothing. Armor did nothing. The Geller fields remained active. The infection came through the warp itself. The Death Guard had been engineered to survive almost anything. That made the plague worse. Their organs kept them alive while their bodies rotted. Boils rose in groups of 3, flesh split, organs dissolved. Flies gathered inside sealed armor. The legionaries felt every moment, but they could not die. Raheb Zuriek was among the first. Mortarion watched him collapse beneath a disease no apothecary could understand. Zuriek's eyes begged for release. Mortarion took a blade. He told his son that his service had been honorable. Then he cut through Zuriek's primary heart. The killing blow was perfect. It changed nothing. Zuriek rose again. The blade corroded inside his chest and broke apart. His dead heart remained still. His body
continued to suffer. Mortarion had built his identity around endurance. Now endurance had become torture. The outbreaks multiplied, every vessel filled with warriors who could neither recover nor die. Mortarion found the truth in Caelus Typhon. Typhon had arranged the death of the navigators. He had guided the fleet into this region of the warp. He had trapped the legion inside the domain of his god. Mortarion confronted him aboard the Terminus Est. The ship had become a rotting tomb. His death shroud followed. Typhon's grave wardens waited for them. Brothers turned their weapons upon each other. Mortarion fought through them and found his oldest friend. Typhon did not deny the betrayal. He called the plague a gift. The Death Guard had always worshipped endurance without understanding where perfect endurance led. Here, they could not die. They could decay forever. Typhon believed this was their destiny. Mortarion attacked. Silence met Typhon's scythe. The Primarch broke his weapon and drove his own blade through the first captain. Silence cut through both hearts. Typhon died. Then he opened his eyes. The warp would not release him. He drew a corrupted knife and wounded Mortarion. Boils rose upon the Primarch's hand. The destroyer plague had entered him. Mortarion used his final weapon. A teleport beacon opened inside the chamber. Ignatius Grolgor appeared. Once, Grolgor had been a Death Guard captain. Now he was the Eater of Lives, a demon formed from disease and the remnants of the Life Eater virus. Mortarion had bound the creature to his service. He commanded it to destroy Typhon. Grolgor seized the first captain by the throat. Then both creatures began to laugh. Grolgor had sworn obedience to Mortarion, but his first loyalty belonged to Nurgle. Typhon accepted the god's final gift. He tore open Grolgor's throat. A black hurricane of flies exploded into the chamber. They passed through armor and consumed the warriors around them. Then the swarm turned toward Typhon. The insects entered the wound in his chest. They poured into his mouth. His body expanded. Bone and armor fused. Chimneys of horn burst from his back. Caelus Typhon died. Something else rose. Typhus, herald of the destroyer plague, living host of the swarm. Mortarion looked upon the creature that had once been his closest friend. Typhus told him the trap had always been waiting. Every compromise, every forbidden ritual, every step Mortarion had taken while claiming to hate sorcery, all of it had led here. The Death Guard were changing throughout the fleet. Some fought the mutations, some went mad, others welcomed them. Mortarion felt the same corruption moving through his blood. He could resist. His sons could not. Typhus offered the only choice left. Submit to Nurgle. Accept the transformation. End the suffering of the Legion, or continue resisting while every Death Guard endured agony without end. Mortarion had spent his life refusing to kneel. On Barbarous, he had defied the monster who raised him. During the Great Crusade, he had resented the emperor who stole his victory. Now another father waited beyond the veil, and this one had built a prison from Mortarion's greatest virtue. The Death Guard could endure anything. Nurgle intended to make them prove it forever.
Mortarion walked through the dying fleet. His sons no longer resembled the warriors he had raised. Flesh swelled around armor. Bone pushed through ceramite. Flies nested inside open wounds. Some legionaries begged him for help. Others had lost the ability to speak. A few had already begun to praise the change. Mortarion could feel the plague inside himself. He resisted it. The pain grew. Nurgle did not need to defeat him in battle. The god only needed to wait. That was the cruelty of the trap. Mortarion had taught his sons that endurance was strength. Now, every moment they endured became another moment of suffering. He had promised to free the people of Barbarous from monsters. He had failed to free himself. The voice of Nurgle reached him through the warp. To defeat death, Mortarion would have to become part of it. To end the pain, he would have to surrender his soul. Mortarion understood the price. The plague would stop being a punishment. His sons would survive, but they would survive as servants of the god who had tortured them into submission. Everything Mortarion hated would become part of him. Sorcery, corruption, slavery. He looked upon the legion he had failed. Then the Primarch who had spent his life refusing to kneel finally surrendered. Nurgle answered. The destroyer plague changed. Pain became strength. Rot became renewal. The Death Guard rose inside bodies that could decay without dying. Their armor fused with their flesh. Their wounds became homes for disease. Mortarion changed with them. Wings unfolded from his back. Poison filled the air around him. The liberator of Barbarous became a demon prince. He had saved his sons from agony. He had also condemned them forever. The Death Guard fleet escaped the trap. When it returned to reality, it was no longer the Legion that had entered the warp. Typhon had become Typhus. Mortarion belonged to Nurgle, and the last great force Horus needed was ready for Terra. But while one brotherhood was being enslaved, another was being created in secret. On Terra, Malcador had gathered warriors from legions shattered by betrayal. Nathaniel Garrow, Garviel Loken, Tylos Rubio, and others who had served as knights errant. They had carried out missions no legion could acknowledge. They had fought demons before most of the Imperium accepted that demons existed. Now Malcador offered them a new purpose. They would abandon their old colors, their old loyalties, even their old names. They would travel to Titan, hidden from the wider Imperium. There they would build an order created to fight the enemies that conventional armies could not defeat. Not all accepted. Garrow had followed Malcador through the darkest years of the Heresy. Now the Sigillite released him from that service.
Garrow would remain on Terra and follow his own conscience. Loken also refused. He would not exchange the name given to him at birth for another identity. His fate remained tied to Horus. 8 warriors accepted Malkador's command. They passed through the gateway toward Titan. The galaxy would one day know the order born from their mission as the Grey Knights. But that future remained hidden. For now, only Terra mattered. Across the Sol system, defenses were ready. Rogel Dorn had turned the Imperial Palace into a fortress. Sanguinius waited beneath the walls. Jagatai Khan prepared his warriors for a war of movement inside a siege. The Emperor remained bound to the Golden Throne, holding shut the wound Magnus had opened beneath the palace. And beyond the system, the traitor armada gathered. Horus had survived Russ. He had destroyed the last part of himself that still resisted chaos. Angron had been dragged back to the war. Fulgrim had been bound by his true name. Lorgar had been cast aside. Mortarion had surrendered his soul. Every victory had demanded a sacrifice. Every sacrifice had made the coming war worse. The Great Crusade had begun as a promise to unite humanity. It ended with the Emperor's sons leading armies toward his throne. Brother against brother, legion against legion, faith against reason. The dream was gone. Only the palace remained. Horus looked toward Terra. There would be no more delays, no more roads, no more worlds between father and son. The Heresy had reached its final battlefield. The Siege of Terra was about to begin.